After God's warning, Noah no longer had time to wait. They had to leave, not because they wanted to abandon their home, but because Noah knew that a reckoning was coming. As his family prepared, they had many questions. Why did they have to leave? What would really happen? And why did God have to hold an entire city accountable? But even Noah could not answer everything. All he knew was that they had to trust, so they began their journey. Slowly, they moved away from the place they had long called home. Behind them were the houses, the streets, and the people who refused to believe the warning. Ahead of them was an unknown future. But before they could finally get away, one last command was given: do not look back. For Noah's family, that command might have seemed simple, but in reality, it was a test of faith. They had to choose whether they would trust God or return to the world they left behind. And as they continued walking, the reckoning began. Sodom and Gomorrah faced the consequences that had been foretold. The places that were once full of life fell silent. The people who did not heed the warning were caught unprepared. But as Noah's family hurried away, they could not help but sense what was happening behind them. Fear was overwhelming them. They wanted to know what was happening. They wanted to see, but they were warned not to look back. They kept walking until they finally reached a safe distance and looked upon what remained. And there they realized the weight of what they had witnessed. It wasn't just one city that was lost. An entire way of life had ended. A society that had long lived without regard for right and wrong faced the consequences of their choices. For Noah's family, this was a lesson they would never forget. But their trials were not yet over. After all that happened, Noah's children began to question. If God is good, why is there a need for this kind of reckoning? Why does God allow hard things to happen? And if God created man, why did he let man choose wrongdoing? Those are not easy questions to answer. But Noah did not forbid his children to ask. Instead, he let them think. Because faith does not mean you know all the answers. Sometimes, faith is continuing even when you don't understand everything. And that is what Noah is doing. Noah's family tried to start anew, far from Sodom, far from the people they used to know. They strove to live simply. But as they journeyed, a new question arose. Where were they going? What would their lives be now? They didn't know. All they knew was that God continued to guide them. For Noah, God would be their guide. Even if they couldn't see the future, they had to press on. And as they searched for a new place to live, they noticed how different their faith was from the people they encountered. Many people had different gods. There were gods for rain. There were gods for harvest. There were gods for different needs in life. But Noah's belief was different. For him, there is only one true God, the God who created everything. And even though many people did not understand his beliefs, he did not change. But their new life was not easy. On their journey, they saw people living in fear and misguided faith. There were people willing to do harmful things just to get what they wanted. There were people who believed they had to make costly offerings to please their gods. And one day, Noah's family got involved in a dangerous situation. There was a young girl at risk because of a ritual people were performing for their god. Their belief was that something precious had to be given up to make it rain. But Noah knew that was wrong. So he took action, confronting the people performing the ritual. And even though he was just one person against many opponents, he didn't back down, because he knew it wasn't enough to just say you believe in God. There are times when you need to show your convictions. And in that moment, Noah chose to defend an innocent life. The events brought about significant changes. Some people began to ask, perhaps what they believed was wrong. Perhaps the gods they worshipped were not needed. Perhaps there is one God, a God who doesn't require idols or harmful rituals. A God who doesn't need to be appeased through such offerings. But not everything changed immediately. Many still refused to believe. Many still laughed at Noah. To them, he was different. Too many questions, too strong in his beliefs, and above all, too serious about God. But those people didn't know there was a greater reason why Noah had to remain steadfast. Because the biggest test of his faith had yet to come. As time went by, Noah continued to talk to God. Sometimes, his children would see him as if he were talking to himself. They didn't know what he was talking about, but Noah knew. He knew God had a plan, and one day, came the command he never expected. Noah heard the voice of God again. But this time, the message he would hear was not simple. a huge task would be assigned to him, a task that seemed impossible. A task that might seem like madness in the eyes of other people. God told Noah that he needed to build a large sea vessel, an ark. It was so big, not an ordinary boat, not a small vessel that could be used on a river. It was so big it would require a lot of wood and a lot of work to build. Noah looked around. He was not a shipbuilder. He was not an expert in building sea vessels. And most of all, there was no sea in that region. So it was only natural for him to ask, it was like an ark. Why did he need to build such a large boat, and furthermore, where would he use it? But God's answer was about to change everything. A flood was coming, a flood unlike anything man had ever seen, and the ark God asked Noah to build would be the shelter for his family. But he did not yet know the full extent of the command. It's not just his family that needs to be prepared, animals would also be coming, 2 of each kind, and all of them need to be placed inside the ark. For Noah, everything seemed impossible. But after all that he saw, he already knew what he needed to do. He obeyed. So he began to prepare wood, tools, measurements, parts of a great vessel that would gradually take shape. On the first day, people might have thought it was just a strange project, but as the ark grew larger, they became more curious. What was Noah doing? Why is he building such a huge boat, and why in a place with no water? They started to laugh. Some called him crazy, some couldn't believe what he was doing, but Noah didn't stop. While other people were laughing, he was working, while others continued their normal lives, he was preparing for something they couldn't see yet. And here began the hardest part of Noah's faith. It wasn't enough to hear God, he needed to obey even if he hadn't seen any evidence yet. He needed to work even if he was being laughed at. He needed to continue even if no one else believed. Because the ark is not just a project, it is a test of how much he can trust God. And as the framework of the ark gradually rises, there is something the world does not yet know. The people who are laughing at Noah now are about to face the greatest flood humanity has ever seen.